The Illusion of Choice, Corporate Power versus Democracy. Prologue. A day in the system. The alarm buzzes at 6 a.m., slicing through the silence of the small apartment. Alex groans, pulls the blanket over his head, and steals a few more minutes of sleep, knowing that it won't change anything. A new day has begun, and the demands of life of the system are already knocking. He drags himself out of bed, gulps down stale coffee, and scrolls through news headlines on his phone. A new conflict in the Middle East. Markets react favorably. Energy prices surge. There's barely a moment to process it, just another war, another crisis. Somewhere, stocks are rising. Somewhere, someone is profiting. But not Alex. For him, today will be no different than yesterday, just another day spent working to survive. He showers quickly, skipping breakfast, because time is always against him. It's a 45-minute commute to a job he doesn't love but can't afford to lose. The bills don't care about dreams or dissatisfaction. Rent is due, credit card payments are piling up, and student loans hang over his head like a dark cloud. On the subway, advertisements flash by, offering him fleeting solutions: buy this, own that, escape with us. He swipes through his social media feed, bombarded by carefully curated images of other people's lives, vacations, promotions, smiling faces, new gadgets. For a moment, he wonders, how do they do it? But then the train jolts to a stop, and the thought evaporates. Time to focus. There's work to do. The machinery at work. By 8 a.m., Alex is at his desk, lost in spreadsheets, meetings, and emails. He works hard, but he doesn't know why. It feels like progress, but progress toward what? Promotions only mean more hours, more responsibilities, and barely enough of a pay increase to keep up with inflation. He used to dream of doing something meaningful, of making a difference. But life got in the way. Meanwhile, another war rages somewhere across the globe. Oil companies scramble to secure new contracts. Defense contractors sign billion-dollar deals with governments. The news keeps coming in sound bites, but no one seems to care. Everyone has their own job to do. The machine keeps turning, and the profits keep flowing upward. Alex works through lunch. There's no time to protest or ask questions. The hours slip away, lost to endless tasks that seem urgent but meaningless. He wonders briefly about the state of the world wars, inequality, environmental collapse, but the thought feels distant. What difference would it make if he worried? There's no room in his schedule for resistance. The illusion of choice. At 6 p.m., the workday ends, but the exhaustion lingers. He grabs takeout on the way home, knowing that his fridge is empty. There's no time to shop, no energy to cook. On the evening news, politicians debate policies that sound like change, but are really just more of the same. Elections are coming up, and the candidates make their promises. But Alex knows better. It doesn't matter who wins. The corporations will still pull the strings. The wars will continue. The oil giants, the defense contractors, the pharmaceutical companies, they'll keep running the show. Votes don't change anything, only markets do. He used to feel angry about this. Now he just feels tired. Maybe this is just the way things are, he thinks. Maybe war and struggle are inevitable, and all anyone can do is survive. No time to resist. By 9 p.m., Alex sinks into his couch, scrolling through Netflix, looking for something to watch, anything to distract him for a few hours before it all starts again tomorrow. He thinks briefly about the protests he saw on social media earlier, people marching, demanding change. He admires them but knows he won't join. He can't afford to miss work, not even for a day. There are bills to pay, deadlines to meet. He feels a pang of guilt. Shouldn't he be doing something? But the guilt passes quickly. The system is too big. What difference could he make? He opens Instagram instead and loses himself in the endless scroll. The perfect prison. Before going to bed, Alex checks his email one last time, hoping he hasn't missed anything important. Another day gone. Another day spent feeding the system without knowing how to escape it. He's tired but knows the exhaustion won't let him sleep easily. Tomorrow will be just like today. The alarm will buzz, the coffee will brew, and the machine will keep turning. Somewhere, stocks will rise. Somewhere, someone will profit. But not Alex. For people like him, there's only work, survival, and distraction. He turns off the light and lies in the dark, too tired to think, too tired to dream. He wonders just for a moment if this is really all there is. But the thought drifts away before it can take shape. There's no time to dwell on it. Tomorrow will be another day in the system. A glimpse into the illusion. This prologue captures the essence of the book's argument that most people are too caught up in survival to realize they are part of a system designed to exploit them. It shows how ordinary life is shaped by unseen forces, by corporate interests, financial markets, and endless work. Alex's story is not extraordinary, it is the story of millions. The prologue sets the stage for the book's deeper exploration of how corporate power shapes the world and why resistance feels impossible. It leaves the reader with a sense of disquiet, forcing them to confront the possibility that they, too, are trapped in the system. Introduction. The greatest illusion of the modern world is that we, the people, hold the power. Every few years, citizens cast their votes, believing that the future lies in their hands. Politicians deliver speeches, media platforms amplify their promises, and governments change hands. But behind this spectacle lies a deeper truth: real power does not reside with voters or elected officials, it belongs to corporations and financial markets. What if democracy is not broken, but never existed in the first place? The invisible hand of the corporate elite ensures that no matter who wins an election, the policies remain the same. The stock market, lobbyists, and multinational corporations do not participate in democracy, they dictate it. Their influence ensures that governments serve business interests first, often at the expense of the public. Whether citizens vote or abstain, the outcome remains the same: a system designed to serve those with wealth and access. A glimpse behind the curtain. Imagine this: after months of rallies, debates, and campaign ads, a newly elected leader walks into office, ready to fulfill their promises. On the very first day, they receive a message from a top investment bank: the markets are uneasy. If you proceed with your tax reforms, the message warns, investors will pull out. The leader pauses. They know what a market crash will mean: plummeting stock prices, mass layoffs, public panic. Within hours, the promised reforms are quietly shelved, and business as usual resumes. This scenario is no fiction, it plays out time and again in boardrooms, parliaments, and presidential offices around the world. The true rulers of the modern world are not politicians, they are the corporations and financial markets that dictate the limits of government action. The shift from public power to corporate control. The Industrial Revolution ignited this transformation. As factories grew and transportation networks expanded, businesses evolved from local enterprises into multinational powerhouses that transcended national borders. Tycoons like John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and J.P. Morgan amassed fortunes so vast that they could rival entire governments. Rockefeller's Standard Oil controlled nearly 90% of the oil market, dictating not only energy prices but the pace of industrialization itself. Although governments sought to limit corporate influence through antitrust laws, breaking up monopolies only slowed them, it didn't stop them. Standard Oil's dismantling in 1911 resulted in smaller companies, but these fragments continued to dominate the market, with ExxonMobil emerging as one of the world's most powerful corporations. The lesson was clear: corporate power, once accumulated, is nearly impossible to undo. In the 20th century, companies expanded further, becoming multinational giants. Corporations like General Motors, IBM, and Coca-Cola integrated themselves into the economies of multiple countries, making their interests inseparable from government policy. Globalization gave corporations a new kind of leverage: if taxes were too high or labor laws too strict, they could move operations elsewhere, leaving governments desperate to attract or retain business. Financial markets, the silent enforcers. The stock market does more than reflect the economy, it controls it. Governments are forced to align their policies with market expectations because a sudden market crash can bring down an administration. The relationship between politicians and the stock market is symbiotic, but not equal. Governments are dependent on market stability to stay in power. In 2008, the collapse of Lehman Brothers triggered a financial crisis that exposed the fragility of this relationship. Governments injected trillions of dollars into banks and corporations to stabilize the market, prioritizing financial institutions over ordinary citizens. Millions lost their jobs and homes, but the stock market rebounded, benefiting the very corporations that caused the crisis. As Naomi Klein observed, when markets fail, governments don't rescue people, they rescue corporations. The COVID-19 pandemic echoed these dynamics. While small businesses closed their doors and unemployment soared, tech giants like Amazon, Tesla, and Microsoft saw their stock valuation skyrocket. The U.S. government stimulus measures ensured that corporations remained profitable, even as millions of Americans struggled to survive. Governments now frame decisions not in terms of public welfare, but in terms of investor confidence. As one Wall Street executive remarked, it's not the government's job to steer the market. It's the market's job to steer the government. The illusion of democracy. The democratic process today is a carefully orchestrated performance. Candidates campaign on platforms of change, but the moment they enter office, the weight of market expectations and corporate interests forces them to compromise. Even the most well-intentioned leaders learn quickly that opposing corporate interests carries consequences: a market crash, a recession, a loss of political capital. Elections are not about shaping the future, they are about maintaining the status quo. Voters cast their ballots hoping for change, only to discover that lobbyists and financial markets hold the real power. As Noam Chomsky puts it, the smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum. Why this book matters. This book is not a call to despair, it is a call to understand the true dynamics of power and recognize the forces that shape our world. By uncovering the hidden mechanisms of corporate lobbying, financial markets, and media control, we aim to show that the system is not broken, it is functioning exactly as intended. Knowledge is power, and only by understanding how corporations and markets govern can we begin to imagine meaningful change. Through historical accounts, real-world case studies, and expert insights, this book will reveal the hidden networks that connect corporations to governments. It will explore how lobbyists shape policy, how stock markets constrain government action, and how the media ensures that the public remains unaware of these dynamics. At its core, this book asks a difficult but necessary question: is democracy real, or is it just a story we tell ourselves to feel in control? What lies ahead? In the chapters that follow, we will delve deeper into the mechanisms of corporate lobbying, the influence of financial markets, the control exerted by media outlets, and the consequences of globalization. We will uncover how these forces work together to ensure that corporate interests always come first. The truth may be unsettling, but it is also liberating. Once you see the strings that control the system, you cannot unsee them. This book is not just a revelation, it is an invitation to explore the reality behind the illusion of democracy and begin imagining what real power could look like. Welcome to the world behind the curtain. Chapter 1: The Rise of Corporate Power. Power is not always declared, it accumulates in silence. Governments may hold elections, pass laws, and appear to lead, but in the modern world, true power belongs to those who control wealth and influence policy: corporations. Over centuries, what began as small businesses evolved into global conglomerates, transcending borders and reshaping the political and economic landscape. Today, corporate interests determine the priorities of nations and leave governments dependent on them for survival. The result is a world where the line between government and corporation blurs. The Industrial Revolution and the birth of giants. The Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th centuries marked the turning point. Steam engines, railroads, and mechanized production transformed industries, allowing businesses to grow larger and more powerful. It was during this period that names like John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and J.P. Morgan emerged, not just as business leaders but as architects of the modern corporate empire. Rockefeller Standard Oil became the dominant force in energy, controlling nearly 90% of the U.S. oil market by the 1880s. Rockefeller didn't just own oil wells, he owned the supply chains, refineries, and distribution networks, ensuring that anyone who wanted to compete was either crushed or absorbed. "Competition is a sin," Rockefeller famously said, and through monopolistic control, Standard Oil shaped the economy in ways no government could. Even when Standard Oil was dismantled by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1911, its legacy continued through spin-offs like ExxonMobil, which remains one of the largest energy companies in the world today. Similarly, Andrew Carnegie's steel empire provided the infrastructure for the modern industrial economy, supplying the steel that built railroads, bridges, and skyscrapers. When Carnegie's company was eventually sold to J.P. Morgan, it became U.S. Steel, the first billion-dollar corporation in history. These giants were not just businesses, they were pillars of power, influencing policy and dictating the course of economic development. Monopolies, multinationals, and global influence. As corporations grew, they began to operate across borders, becoming multinational entities with interests that extended far beyond their countries of origin. In the 20th century, companies like General Motors, IBM, and Coca-Cola embedded themselves into multiple economies, becoming too big for any single government to control. This shift gave corporations extraordinary leverage. If one country raised taxes or imposed regulations, companies could simply move their operations elsewhere. Nike's relocation of manufacturing in the 1990s offers a perfect example of this corporate maneuvering. Faced with rising labor costs in the US, Nike shifted production to countries with weaker labor laws and cheaper wages. While the move boosted profits, it also revealed the limits of national governments in regulating global corporations. Nike's decision wasn't just about profits, it was a message: if governments want business, they must play by corporate rules. This trend continued with the rise of tech companies in the 21st century. Amazon, Google, and Facebook now wield power not just in the marketplace, but in the political and cultural spheres. They control information, dictate how people interact, and influence public discourse. Governments find themselves not regulating these companies, but dependent on them. The era of deregulation and privatization. The 1980s ushered in a new era of deregulation and privatization. Leaders like Margaret Thatcher in the UK and Ronald Reagan in the US argued that free markets would unleash economic growth by reducing government interference. Public services were sold off to private companies, and regulatory barriers were dismantled. While this era did spark economic growth, it also shifted power decisively into the hands of corporations. Governments that had once controlled essential services like transportation, healthcare, and energy now found themselves relying on private companies to deliver these services. This dependence limited the state's ability to regulate business effectively. The corporate sector became the primary driver of economic policy, with governments acting more as managers of investor confidence than as independent agents of change. Too big to fail, the 2008 financial crisis. The 2008 financial crisis revealed the extent to which governments were beholden to corporate interests. As major financial institutions like Lehman Brothers collapsed, governments stepped in to bail out banks, investment firms, and corporations with trillions of dollars. The justification for these bailouts was clear: the collapse of the financial sector would trigger a global depression. But the reality was more unsettling: governments were saving corporations, not citizens. While financial markets rebounded, millions of people lost their homes, jobs, and savings. Governments claimed these sacrifices were necessary to restore economic stability, but the real priority was restoring market confidence and ensuring that corporate giants remained intact. As Robert Reich later remarked, in the end, the banks were deemed too big to fail, but the people were deemed too small to matter. Big tech and the new power brokers. In today's world, corporations wield power not just through profits, but through information and technology. Google shapes what we learn, Amazon determines how we shop, and Facebook influences what we believe. At the same time, financial giants like BlackRock and Vanguard quietly manage trillions in assets, influencing entire economies. These companies don't just participate in the economy, they control its infrastructure. When governments attempt to regulate these companies, they encounter fierce resistance. The European Union's efforts to fine Google for antitrust violations in 2019 revealed the limits of state power. Google paid the fine, shrugged off the penalties, and continued its business as usual. The message was clear: governments may impose penalties, but they cannot truly control the companies that shape the modern world. The blurring of government and corporate lines. As corporations gain more influence, the distinction between government and business becomes increasingly blurred. Lobbyists move seamlessly between public office and private enterprise, ensuring that corporate interests are embedded in policy decisions. Governments, desperate to attract investment and maintain economic growth, tailor their policies to suit corporate demands. What does it mean when governments rely on corporations to deliver essential services and sustain economic growth? It means that governments no longer govern, they manage. They manage markets, manage investor confidence, and manage public expectations, always placing the needs of corporations above those of citizens. The corporate empire by design. The rise of corporate power was not an accident. Deregulation, globalization, and privatization were deliberate policies designed to shift power from the public sphere to private hands. Today, corporations operate like sovereign entities, influencing policy, shaping elections, and controlling information. Governments no longer have the freedom to act independently, they are bound by the interests of the market. This chapter has traced the rise of corporate power from the Industrial Revolution to the era of big tech. In the next chapter, we will explore how corporate lobbying ensures that no matter who is elected, the same agendas persist. Elections may change the faces in office, but corporate interests remain constant. Chapter 2: Corporate Lobbying and Government Influence. Behind every politician stands an army of lobbyists, corporate agents who shape policies long before they reach the public. Governments may claim to serve the people, but lobbyists ensure that the interests of powerful companies come first. This isn't democracy, it's a carefully choreographed performance where laws are written by those with the deepest pockets. Voters cast their ballots every few years, but lobbyists work daily, ensuring that corporate influence remains uninterrupted. Lobbying is where money meets power. Corporations don't just influence policy, they write it. They embed their interests in legislation, ensuring that whoever sits in office follows the corporate agenda. Politicians may change, but the lobbyists remain, ensuring that corporate priorities transcend elections. As Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock, famously remarked, "Markets like totalitarian governments, but markets hate uncertainty." Lobbying ensures that policy remains predictable, no matter who wins. The mechanism of influence. Lobbying operates in the shadows, where access is currency. Many lobbyists are former politicians or their aides, leveraging personal relationships with lawmakers to gain access and influence. This system, known as the revolving door, ensures that corporate interests are woven into the fabric of government. A former senator becomes a corporate lobbyist, offering lawmakers not just policy advice, but the promise of future campaign donations or even a lucrative job once they leave office. The 2010 Citizens United ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court gave corporations even more power. Money is speech, the court declared, allowing companies to spend unlimited amounts on political campaigns. This decision paved the way for super PACs and dark money groups, enabling corporations to funnel millions into elections, ensuring that candidates align with corporate interests. Once elected, politicians face relentless pressure from lobbyists who write bills, provide research, and shape public narratives. A member of Congress may introduce a bill, but that bill was likely drafted by a corporate lawyer. In Washington, D.C., for every member of Congress, there are 23 lobbyists working to ensure that policies benefit their clients, not the public. Case studies of corporate influence. 1. The pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry exemplifies how lobbying shapes public policy. In 2003, the U.S. government passed Medicare Part D, which included a crucial provision: the government was barred from negotiating drug prices. This provision, inserted at the behest of pharmaceutical companies, ensured soaring drug prices and billions in profits for companies like Pfizer and Merck. During the COVID-19 pandemic, pharmaceutical giants benefited from billions in public funding to develop vaccines while retaining control of the patents, limiting global access. 2. The oil and gas industry. The fossil fuel industry has spent decades blocking environmental legislation to maintain its dominance. In 2021, ExxonMobil's lobbyists were caught on tape, revealing how they targeted key U.S. senators to weaken climate proposals. Despite the urgency of climate change, fossil fuel companies continue to shape energy policy, ensuring that subsidies remain intact and meaningful reform is delayed. 3. Big Tech's grip on regulation. Big tech companies like Google, Amazon, and Facebook have mastered lobbying to fend off regulatory threats. When the European Union introduced the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, these companies lobbied aggressively to shape the law. The final version allowed them to maintain control over vast amounts of user data. Similarly, Amazon, which thrived during the COVID-19 pandemic, used lobbying to block labor reforms, ensuring low wages and poor working conditions for its warehouse employees. The global reach of corporate lobbying. Corporate lobbying is not confined to national borders. Multinational corporations influence international trade agreements, labor policies, and environmental standards. One clear example is the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. Although NAFTA was framed as a tool for economic growth, it primarily benefited large corporations, granting them access to cheaper labor markets. Small businesses and workers across the US, Canada, and Mexico were displaced and undermined by the same policies that enriched corporations. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, offers another example. Negotiated behind closed doors, corporate lobbyists played a central role in drafting the agreement, while labor unions and environmental groups were excluded from the process. Though the TPP was never ratified, it revealed the extent to which trade deals are designed to serve multinational corporations rather than the public interest. Lobbying as a threat to democracy. Lobbying is often defended as a way for interest groups to make their voices heard. However, when corporations dominate the lobbying landscape, the voices of ordinary citizens are drowned out. Laws are not written with the public in mind, they are written to serve those who can afford access. This imbalance threatens the very foundation of democracy. Politicians depend on corporate donors to fund their campaigns. Even well-meaning leaders must cater to corporate interests to secure future donations and political survival. This creates a vicious cycle where governments serve corporate interests first and public needs second. As Robert Reich noted, politicians have become little more than the brokers of corporate power. Lobbying also ensures that policies remain consistent across political transitions. No matter who wins an election, the same corporate interests shape the agenda behind the scenes. Lobbying ensures that governments maintain the status quo, even if it conflicts with the will of the people. The corporate agenda beyond elections. Elections create the illusion of change, but lobbying guarantees continuity. Politicians may come and go, but corporate lobbyists remain, ensuring that the interests of the wealthiest companies prevail. Governments rely on corporations for economic growth, jobs, and campaign funding, leaving little room for independent action. In this way, corporate influence transcends democracy. Corporate lobbying is the invisible hand that guides public policy, ensuring that government actions align with business interests. As long as lobbying dominates the political landscape, voters will remain spectators, not participants, in the democratic process. In the next chapter, we will explore how financial markets shape government behavior, further tightening the grip of corporate power. Just as lobbying ensures that laws favor corporations, the stock market determines how governments prioritize their policies. Chapter 3: The Stock Market's Role in Politics. The stock market isn't just a measure of economic performance, it's a force that dictates government behavior. While elections give citizens the illusion of control, the real power lies in the hands of investors and corporations, whose reactions to government policies can make or break entire economies. When stock markets thrive, politicians take credit. But when markets falter, governments scramble to restore confidence no matter the cost to the public. This isn't democracy. It's governance by the silent whims of financial markets. The stock market is not just a reflection of national health, it is the thermostat, setting the conditions under which governments must operate. Policies are crafted not for the public good, but to satisfy investors and prevent market disruptions. In this way, the market controls government action, shaping policy, elections, and public narratives. Bailouts, rescuing markets, not citizens. The 2008 financial crisis offers a stark example of the stock market's power over government policy. As the housing bubble burst, financial giants like Lehman Brothers and AIG teetered on the brink of collapse. Governments around the world responded with trillions of dollars in bailouts, not to save citizens, but to stabilize markets. The collapse of these institutions would have triggered a global depression, threatening the financial system's very foundation. Despite the rescue efforts, millions of people lost their homes, jobs, and savings. Public outrage was palpable, but governments insisted that saving the market was the only way to save the economy. Banks were too big to fail, critics argued, but people were too small to matter. As Robert Reich later commented, bailouts weren't about rescuing people, they were about rescuing the stock market. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed the same dynamic on a global scale. While small businesses shuttered and unemployment soared, tech giants like Amazon and Tesla flourished. The U.S. government stimulus measures poured billions into financial markets, ensuring that corporations remained profitable, even as millions struggled to survive. Stock prices soared to record highs, creating a glaring disconnect between Wall Street and Main Street. Investor confidence as a political compass. Governments rely on the stock market as a barometer for political stability. If markets are stable, politicians claim credit for economic success. But if markets tumble, the pressure to act is immense. Politicians know that investors can punish policies they dislike by triggering market sell-offs. One clear example is the Greek debt crisis of 2010. As Greece struggled with mounting debt, the government initially resisted demands from the European Union and the International Monetary Fund to impose austerity measures. But as investor confidence plummeted and markets responded with panic, the government was forced to slash public services, raise taxes, and cut pensions policies that devastated the population. It wasn't the people we had to satisfy, one Greek official admitted. It was the markets. The Federal Reserve plays a similar role in the U.S., adjusting interest rates not only based on inflation but also to maintain market stability. A rate hike that investors don't expect can send markets into free fall, while delaying action to appease investors risks inflation spiraling out of control. Central banks, though supposedly independent, are bound by market expectations. How markets shape elections. Stock markets also influence the outcome of elections. Investors closely monitor campaigns, adjusting their strategies based on which candidate they believe will favor their interests. In the lead-up to the 2016 U.S. presidential election, markets initially panicked when Donald Trump's victory seemed certain. But once investors saw his promises of tax cuts and deregulation, stock prices rebounded. The message was clear: markets don't care about political ideology, they care about policies that boost profits. Once in office, politicians are constrained by the need to keep markets stable. Even leaders who campaign on promises of reform must tread carefully, knowing that policies deemed unfavorable by investors can trigger stock sell-offs, unemployment spikes, and recessions. This dynamic ensures that election outcomes change little when it comes to policy priorities. As Naomi Klein observed, the market isn't an indicator of democracy, it's an indicator of how well corporate elites are doing. Stock buybacks, serving shareholders, not workers. One of the clearest examples of market-driven policy is the rise of stock buybacks. After the 2017 corporate tax cuts in the US, companies were expected to reinvest their savings in higher wages and innovation. Instead, many companies used the money for stock buybacks, artificially inflating share prices and enriching executives and shareholders. Walmart spent billions on buybacks, while many of its employees remained on food stamps and government assistance. The message was clear: shareholders come first, workers second. Governments, reluctant to regulate buybacks, celebrated the rising stock market as a sign of economic success, ignoring the growing gap between corporate profits and public welfare. Markets versus climate policy. The stock market's obsession with short-term profits also constrains government action on long-term challenges like climate change. When President Biden proposed ambitious climate reforms in 2021, stock prices for fossil fuel companies dropped, signaling investor resistance. Governments are forced to balance environmental goals with market demands, knowing that aggressive climate action could trigger economic disruptions. Even the rise of ESG, environmental, social, and governance investing, which promises to promote corporate responsibility, has proven to be more about public relations than real change. BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, champions ESG principles while continuing to invest heavily in fossil fuels. As Larry Fink observed, the market will reward those who follow ESG trends until profits say otherwise. The stock market as a silent ruler. The stock market doesn't just influence government policy, it enforces it. Governments must align with investor expectations to maintain stability, even if it means sacrificing the public good. Leaders who challenge market orthodoxy risk not only stock sell-offs but also economic crises that can topple governments. This chapter has shown that the stock market acts as a silent ruler, setting the parameters within which governments must operate. Policies are framed not around what is best for the people but around what will keep markets satisfied. In the next chapter, we will explore how media outlets amplify the narratives that protect corporate interests, ensuring that the public remains unaware of the true dynamics at play. Chapter 4: The Media as the Corporate Messenger. The media shapes what we know, what we care about, and, most importantly, what we believe. In theory, the press acts as the watchdog of democracy, ensuring that the public remains informed and governments are held accountable. In reality, however, the media serves as a tool of corporate power, controlling public perception to protect the status quo. Just as politicians align with corporate interests, news outlets tailor their narratives to please advertisers, investors, and powerful owners. The result is a media landscape that tells the public what to think about but not what to think. The marriage of media and corporate power. The connection between corporations and the media is far from incidental. Large media companies rely on corporate advertising dollars to survive, and in turn, corporations shape the content that news outlets produce. Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, bought the Washington Post in 2013, raising concerns about whether the paper could report objectively on Amazon's growing influence. Meanwhile, Rupert Murdoch's media empire has long shaped public opinion in ways that favor the interests of powerful elites. Media conglomerates like Comcast, Disney, and Viacom-CBS dominate television, radio, and online platforms. Their business model revolves around advertising revenue, meaning that their survival depends on keeping corporate clients happy. As a result, stories that challenge corporate power rarely make it to air. The press doesn't bite the hand that feeds it, it protects it. Chomsky and Herman's propaganda models explains how the media filters information to align with elite interests. The media's job is not to inform but to maintain the status quo, Chomsky observed. News outlets selectively cover events and frame issues in ways that reinforce the interests of corporate advertisers and investors. The invisible hand in the newsroom. When powerful interests control the media, the line between information and propaganda disappears. Stories about labor movements or environmental protests are either underreported or framed negatively, while corporate achievements are celebrated as economic success. For example, Amazon's warehouse conditions, long criticized for being unsafe and exploitative, received limited critical coverage in mainstream media. At the same time, stories about Amazon stock surges and technological innovations were widely publicized. The media also acts as a gatekeeper, controlling public discourse. Politicians who promote corporate-friendly policies receive favorable coverage, while those who challenge corporate interests are marginalized. For instance, Bernie Sanders' campaigns with their focus on income inequality and corporate regulation were frequently dismissed by mainstream outlets as unrealistic or extreme. This filtering process ensures that the public only hears narratives that align with corporate priorities. By deciding which stories to amplify and which to ignore, the media creates a distorted reality in which corporate interests appear synonymous with the public good. The role of public relations and think tanks. Corporations don't just rely on the media to shape narratives, they actively produce content through public relations campaigns and think tanks. PR firms craft messages designed to frame corporate actions in a positive light, turning potential crises into opportunities. When oil companies like ExxonMobil are criticized for their environmental impact, PR teams step in with campaigns emphasizing green initiatives and sustainability goals, even as the company continues to invest in fossil fuels. Think tanks funded by corporations further influence media narratives. Organizations like the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, and the American Enterprise Institute publish research and reports designed to promote corporate interests. These think tanks often provide experts to comment on news stories, giving corporate-backed opinions the appearance of independent analysis. Manufacturing consent, the illusion of public opinion. The media doesn't just report the news, it manufactures public opinion. By framing issues in specific ways, the media directs public attention toward trivial controversies and away from systemic problems. Stories about celebrity scandals or political infighting dominate headlines, while reports on poverty, inequality, and corporate influence are relegated to the margins. This strategy ensures that the public remains distracted and divided. As long as people are consumed with debates over surface-level issues, they are less likely to question the structures that concentrate power in the hands of corporations. The media presents elections as monumental battles between competing ideologies, but the policies that truly matter, those that affect wealth distribution and corporate regulation, remain untouched. Controlling the narrative, crisis management and media spin. During moments of crisis, media outlets become essential tools for shaping public perception. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, the media quickly adopted the narrative that bailing out the banks was necessary to save the economy. Few outlets questioned why ordinary people were left to bear the burden while corporations received government support. Similarly, during the COVID-19 pandemic, media coverage focused on rising stock prices and corporate profits, while stories about unemployment and food insecurity were downplayed. Media spin ensures that crises are framed in ways that benefit corporate interests. When stock prices rise, it's celebrated as economic growth, even if it comes at the expense of workers. When environmental activists call for action, they are often portrayed as radicals threatening economic stability. In every instance, the media aligns itself with the interests of those who control wealth and power. Media and elections, creating the illusion of choice. The media plays a crucial role in shaping elections, determining which candidates get airtime and how their platforms are portrayed. Corporate-backed candidates receive favorable coverage, while those who challenge the status quo are either ignored or criticized. The 2016 U.S. election provides a telling example. Media outlets initially treated Donald Trump's campaign as a sideshow, giving him constant coverage that fueled his rise. At the same time, candidates like Bernie Sanders, who threatened corporate interests with calls for wealth redistribution, received far less attention. By deciding who gets exposure, the media guides public perception, ensuring that the winners are those who align with corporate priorities. The media's role in sustaining corporate power. The media does not simply report on events, it creates the narratives that sustain corporate power. By controlling what the public sees and hears, the media ensures that corporate interests remain unchallenged. When protests erupt against inequality or climate change, they are framed as isolated incidents rather than symptoms of systemic problems. As long as the media controls the flow of information, citizens remain unaware of the deeper forces shaping their lives. Elections come and go, but the narratives remain the same. The media portrays governments as protectors of the public good, even as they serve the interests of corporations. This chapter has shown that the media is not a neutral observer, it is a corporate tool. In the next chapter, we will explore how globalization further strengthens corporate control, allowing companies to operate beyond the reach of governments and ensuring that corporate interests always come first. Chapter 5: Globalization and the Erosion of Government Power. Globalization promised a world without borders, one where trade flows freely, economies prosper, and nations work together to solve global challenges. In practice, however, globalization has empowered corporations while weakening governments, creating a system where companies operate beyond the reach of any single nation. Governments may claim sovereignty, but in a globalized world, corporate interests set the rules. Through globalization, companies have grown so large and interconnected that they now transcend national borders, shaping policies across continents. When corporations move operations overseas to evade taxes or labor laws, they effectively hold governments hostage, demanding ever lower regulations and incentives in exchange for staying. The balance of power has shifted irreversibly. Governments no longer govern, they compete. The race to the bottom, when corporations rule the world. One of the most visible effects of globalization is the race to the bottom. Nations compete to attract multinational corporations by lowering taxes, weakening labor protections, and relaxing environmental standards. If one country demands higher wages or enforces stricter regulations, corporations can simply relocate to a friendlier jurisdiction. This dynamic ensures that governments cater to corporate interests, fearing that any attempt to regulate businesses will result in job losses and economic stagnation. Apple, for instance, has long outsourced manufacturing to China to take advantage of lower labor costs, while Nike shifted production to Southeast Asia, where wages are a fraction of those in Western countries. These moves boost profits for shareholders but weaken the bargaining power of workers and leave governments powerless to intervene. The same dynamic plays out in the financial sector. Corporations funnel profits into offshore tax havens like the Cayman Islands or Luxembourg, depriving governments of much-needed tax revenue. Despite promises of reform, efforts to close loopholes have been met with fierce resistance from corporate lobbyists. The result? Trillions of dollars in corporate profits remain untaxed, forcing governments to cut social services and raise taxes on ordinary citizens to make up the shortfall. The power of trade agreements and supranational organizations. Globalization has also shifted power from national governments to supranational organizations like the World Trade Organization, WTO, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank. While these organizations were created to promote international cooperation, they now act as enforcers of corporate interests, pressuring countries to adopt policies that benefit global businesses. The North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, serves as a powerful example of how trade agreements prioritize corporate profits over public welfare. NAFTA opened up markets across the US, Canada, and Mexico, allowing companies to relocate manufacturing jobs to Mexico to take advantage of lower wages. While corporations thrived, millions of American workers lost their jobs, and labor conditions in Mexico deteriorated. Trade agreements also limit governments' ability to regulate corporations. Under investor-state dispute settlement (ISDS) clauses, companies can sue governments in secret arbitration panels if they believe regulations threaten their profits. In 2011, Sweden's energy giant Vattenfall sued the German government for phasing out nuclear power, demanding compensation for lost profits. These disputes show that corporations now have the power to challenge national laws and win. Corporations without borders, global power, local impact. In the globalized world, corporations are no longer accountable to any single government. They operate in multiple countries, moving capital, labor, and resources across borders with ease. This makes it nearly impossible for governments to hold them accountable for environmental damage, labor abuses, or tax evasion. One telling example is Royal Dutch Shell's operations in Nigeria. While Shell profits from the extraction of oil, local communities suffer from environmental degradation and human rights abuses. Efforts by the Nigerian government to hold Shell accountable have been thwarted by legal loopholes and international protections that shield corporations from responsibility. In this way, globalization creates a system where companies enjoy the benefits of operating worldwide without bearing the costs. The financial sector operates similarly. Investment firms like BlackRock and Vanguard control trillions of dollars in global assets, influencing markets and policies without being subject to meaningful regulation. Governments depend on these firms for economic stability, making it nearly impossible to challenge their practices. The environmental cost of globalization. Globalization also accelerates environmental destruction. As companies move production to countries with weaker environmental regulations, they leave a trail of pollution, deforestation, and resource depletion in their wake. Amazon deforestation is driven not just by local farmers but by global demand for beef and soy, with multinational corporations fueling the process. Governments that attempt to enforce environmental protections often face retaliation. When Indonesia tried to restrict palm oil production to protect its rainforests, multinational companies threatened to shift their operations to other countries, forcing the government to back down. In this way, globalization makes sustainable development nearly impossible, locking countries into a cycle of environmental degradation for the sake of economic growth. Globalization and inequality, the growing divide. While globalization has enriched corporations and shareholders, it has also widened the gap between the wealthy and the poor. Workers in developing countries earn subsistence wages, while CEOs and investors reap the rewards of cheap labor and tax havens. In 2020, the world's richest 1% controlled more wealth than the bottom 50% combined, a testament to how globalization concentrates wealth at the top. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the fragility of this system. While tech companies and investment firms posted record profits, millions of workers were laid off or forced into precarious employment. Global supply chains collapsed, exposing the vulnerabilities of an interconnected economy. Governments tried to respond with stimulus measures, but the real beneficiaries were corporations and financial markets, not ordinary people. As Thomas Piketty observed, globalization has created a system where capital knows no borders, but labor does. The result is a race to the bottom for workers and a race to the top for wealth. Governments as managers of global capital. In the globalized world, governments have become managers of global capital, balancing the demands of corporations with the needs of their citizens. Policies are crafted to attract foreign investment, often at the expense of social services and environmental protections. Governments must compete, not govern. This shift has profound implications for democracy. When governments prioritize corporate interests over public welfare, elections become little more than symbolic events. Voters may choose their leaders, but corporate power ensures that the policies remain the same. This chapter has shown that globalization strengthens corporate power while weakening government sovereignty. In the next chapter, we will explore how technology, particularly big tech and artificial intelligence, further consolidates power in the hands of a few, raising new questions about the future of governance and control. Chapter 6: Technology and the New Age of Corporate Control. The rise of technology has not only transformed how we live, it has redefined the boundaries of power. In the digital age, the most powerful corporations are not industrial giants or financial institutions, but tech companies that control information, communication, and infrastructure. Companies like Google, Amazon, Apple, and Facebook have become gatekeepers of the digital world, determining what we see, hear, and even believe. Governments now depend on these companies not just for economic growth, but for maintaining public order and surveillance. Technology, once seen as a tool for liberation, has become a mechanism for consolidating corporate control. Big tech, the new power brokers. Tech companies have grown so large that they now dictate the rules of engagement for economies and societies. Google controls 90% of the search engine market, influencing how knowledge is accessed. Amazon dominates e-commerce, setting standards for global logistics and reshaping how people shop. Apple's control over mobile platforms determines how apps are developed and distributed, while Facebook and Instagram control social interaction and public discourse. These companies do not merely operate within the economy, they shape it. Their power also extends to politics and governance. In 2018, Facebook was embroiled in a scandal involving Cambridge Analytica, which exploited user data to influence elections, including the 2016 US presidential election. The incident exposed how tech companies, often under the guise of neutrality, manipulate information and influence democratic processes. Governments, recognizing the immense influence of big tech, have tried to impose regulations. But tech giants use their resources and influence to evade meaningful oversight. When the European Union fined Google $5 billion for antitrust violations, Google paid the fine without blinking, continuing its practices without meaningful change. The message was clear: governments can fine, but they cannot control. The data economy, power in information. At the heart of tech companies' power is data, personal information harvested from billions of users worldwide. Data is the new oil, and companies that control it hold immense leverage. Facebook, Google, and Amazon collect more data than most governments, using it to predict consumer behavior, influence markets, and even shape public opinion. Governments increasingly depend on tech companies for surveillance and security, creating a dangerous partnership. China's use of facial recognition technology to monitor its citizens illustrates the dark side of this relationship, where private tech firms develop tools for state control. In the US, Amazon's Ring cameras and partnerships with police departments raise questions about privacy and corporate-government collaboration. The boundaries between corporate surveillance and state surveillance blur, leaving citizens with little room for autonomy. Artificial intelligence, the next frontier of corporate power. The rise of artificial intelligence, AI, is poised to further consolidate corporate control. AI technologies, developed primarily by private companies like Google DeepMind, OpenAI, and Microsoft, are revolutionizing industries from healthcare to finance. However, the deployment of AI raises profound ethical questions about power and control. Governments are ill-equipped to regulate AI technologies that outpace the speed of legislation. Private companies hold a monopoly on AI research, patents, and algorithms, ensuring that they dictate how the technology is used and who benefits from it. In 2020, Google fired 2 AI ethics researchers after they raised concerns about biases in the company's algorithms, revealing the lack of accountability within big tech. As AI systems become more integrated into everyday life, controlling transportation, healthcare, and even military operations, the question of who controls the algorithms becomes increasingly urgent. Without regulation, AI could reinforce existing inequalities, automate surveillance, and entrench corporate control over society. Automation and the future of work. Another critical impact of technological advancement is automation, which is rapidly reshaping the global workforce. Robots, AI systems, and automated processes are replacing human labor in industries ranging from manufacturing to retail. While automation increases efficiency and reduces costs for corporations, it also displaces millions of workers, leaving them with few alternatives. Companies like Amazon have embraced automation, deploying robots in warehouses to replace human employees. In the process, workers have become cogs in a system optimized for speed and profit, subject to surveillance and harsh working conditions. As Elon Musk remarked, with automation comes abundance, but without proper policy, it can also bring massive unemployment. Governments, fearing economic instability, offer subsidies to corporations that promise to retrain displaced workers. But these programs often fall short, leaving workers in precarious positions while corporations reap the rewards of increased productivity. Technology as a tool for control. Beyond the economy, technology serves as a tool for social control. Governments and corporations use algorithms to shape behavior and control narratives. Social media algorithms prioritize content that generates engagement, even if it spreads misinformation or stokes political division. AI-driven predictive policing systems disproportionately target marginalized communities, perpetuating discrimination while masquerading as objective tools. As the line between technology and governance blurs, corporations gain the ability to shape social norms and political realities. The result is a world where technology, far from empowering individuals, ensures that corporate interests remain unchallenged. Governments as partners, not regulators. Governments have become partners, not regulators, of technology companies. Policymakers rely on big tech for infrastructure, economic growth, and political stability, limiting their ability to enforce meaningful regulations. The pandemic only accelerated this dynamic, as governments turned to Amazon, Google, and Facebook to manage public health data, distribute information, and maintain supply chains. During the COVID-19 pandemic, tech companies profited immensely, while governments struggled to keep up. Jeff Bezos' wealth soared as Amazon thrived, yet efforts to improve labor conditions were met with resistance. Governments need these companies to function, and tech giants know it. This interdependence ensures that corporate interests will always take precedence over public welfare. This chapter has shown that technology has become the new frontier of corporate control. In the next chapter, we will explore how even the potential replacements for big tech like decentralization and blockchain are being co-opted by corporate interests, raising new questions about power, control, and the future of governance. Chapter 7: The Illusion of Decentralization and the Corporate Capture of Innovation. For years, decentralization has been celebrated as a revolutionary solution to the problems created by big tech and centralized governance. Blockchain technology, cryptocurrencies, and Web3 promise to disrupt the old order, offering people autonomy and freedom from corporate control. However, as these innovations matured, it became clear that corporations are always one step ahead, ready to co-opt even the most disruptive technologies. The idea that decentralization could empower individuals and shift power from elites to the masses has proven, in many ways, to be an illusion. Blockchain and cryptocurrencies, a promise unfulfilled. Blockchain, the technology behind Bitcoin and Ethereum, was originally conceived as a way to remove intermediaries and give people direct control over their assets and data. Bitcoin's creator, known only as Satoshi Nakamoto, envisioned a world where individuals could exchange value without relying on banks or governments. For a while, it seemed that cryptocurrencies could disrupt the global financial system and usher in a new era of financial freedom. But this vision was quickly absorbed into the very system it sought to replace. Today, Wall Street investment firms and multinational corporations are some of the largest investors in cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin, once hailed as a currency for the people, has become a speculative asset, with financial institutions like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan offering crypto trading services. Decentralization exists in theory, but in practice, cryptocurrencies are increasingly governed by the same corporate forces that dominate traditional finance. Even the blockchain networks themselves are becoming centralized. A small number of entities control most of the Bitcoin mining operations, while venture capital firms heavily influence the development of blockchain projects like Ethereum. As Vitalik Buterin, Ethereum's co-founder, noted with frustration, "We thought decentralization would lead to freedom, but instead, it has given rise to new forms of corporate control." Web3 and the rise of corporate influence. The concept of **Web3, an internet built on decentralized technologies **was supposed to offer a way out of the corporate-controlled digital landscape dominated by big tech enthusiasts imagined a future where users would own their data, participate in governance, and earn rewards for their contributions to online platforms. However, large technology firms and venture capitalists have already infiltrated the Web3 space. Meta, formerly Facebook, and Google are developing their own blockchain projects, while venture capital-backed platforms like OpenSea dominate the NFT marketplace. The promise of user empowerment is increasingly overshadowed by the realities of corporate involvement, as investors rush to profit from emerging technologies. As author Douglas Rushkoff put it, every technology that promises to decentralize power eventually becomes a tool for reinforcing it. Web3 may offer the appearance of autonomy, but beneath the surface, the same forces that control Web2 are advertisers, investors, and platforms remain in power. The myth of technological liberation. Technology has long been marketed as a tool for liberation, but history tells a different story. The printing press, the telegraph, the radio all promised to democratize information, yet they quickly became tools for elite control. The same pattern is playing out in the digital age. Blockchain and Web3, hailed as liberating technologies, are now being co-opted by the same corporations they were supposed to disrupt. Cryptocurrencies and decentralized platforms may create new opportunities, but they also reinforce existing inequalities. In a decentralized world, those with the most resources still hold the most power. As tech journalist Cory Doctorow observed, decentralization doesn't eliminate power, it just redistributes it to those who can afford to run the infrastructure. The greenwashing of technology. Many corporations have also used the rhetoric of decentralization to disguise their own interests. Tech companies position themselves as champions of innovation and freedom, even as they consolidate control over markets and resources. Blockchain initiatives are often framed as environmentally friendly solutions, yet the energy consumption of Bitcoin mining alone rivals that of entire nations. Corporations like Tesla capitalize on the trend by accepting Bitcoin payments, while ignoring the environmental impact of cryptocurrency mining. This practice, known as greenwashing, allows companies to frame themselves as part of the solution while continuing to exploit the environment and workers. Decentralization and surveillance, a paradox. Ironically, decentralization has also created new opportunities for surveillance. Blockchain networks are public by design, meaning that transactions and interactions are recorded permanently and transparently. While this offers transparency, it also enables governments and corporations to monitor behavior more effectively. China has already implemented a state-backed digital currency, allowing it to track and control every transaction made within its borders. Decentralized technologies can easily become tools for centralized control, enabling new forms of governance and surveillance. Governments, corporations, and the future of innovation. Governments have largely abdicated their role as regulators of innovation, allowing corporations to shape the development of decentralized technologies. Rather than governing, they have become partners in the pursuit of technological dominance. The U.S. government's close relationship with companies like Microsoft, Google, and Amazon ensures that technology serves geopolitical interests, but not necessarily the public good. This chapter shows that decentralization, while promising on the surface, is ultimately an illusion. The same corporate powers that control traditional industries are positioning themselves to dominate the next wave of innovation, ensuring that they remain at the top of the hierarchy, no matter how technology evolves. In the next chapter, we will explore what happens when even these powerful corporations can no longer thrive without human involvement. Robots may serve mankind, but without people, technology loses its purpose, raising profound questions about the limits of corporate control. Chapter 8: Robots, AI, and the limits of corporate control. Technology has given rise to powerful corporations, but it has also created a paradox. Robots, AI, and automation may serve mankind, but without people, they lose their purpose. The dream of fully automated systems, free from human error and dependency, reveals a deeper truth: corporations cannot exist without human involvement. No matter how advanced machines become, the value of human interaction, creativity, and labor remains irreplaceable. This chapter explores the limits of corporate control through the lens of robotics and AI, raising profound questions about the role of humanity in a highly automated world. Automation without purpose: who serves whom? Corporations have embraced automation as a path to efficiency and profit. In industries ranging from retail to manufacturing, robots and AI-driven systems have replaced human workers, reducing costs and boosting productivity. Companies like Amazon now rely heavily on robotic warehouses to meet the demands of global e-commerce, while automated checkout systems have eliminated the need for cashiers in retail stores. However, automation creates unintended consequences. As workers are displaced, purchasing power declines, leading to weaker consumer demand. Without consumers, corporations lose the very market they depend on to grow. This cycle reveals the fundamental flaw in the pursuit of full automation. Technology can replace labor, but it cannot replace demand. Elon Musk, a staunch advocate of AI, once warned, "Robots will be able to do everything better than us." But if there's no one left to buy things, what's the point? The emotional gap, machines versus human interaction. Despite rapid advancements, robots and AI lack one critical quality: emotion. Corporate systems may automate processes, but they cannot replicate human empathy, creativity, or trust. In industries like healthcare, education, and customer service, human interaction is essential. Patients do not want a machine to diagnose their illness without empathy, and children learn better from teachers who understand their emotions. Corporations have tried to address this limitation by developing chatbots and AI-powered assistants that mimic human conversation. But these systems often fail to satisfy the need for genuine connection. Studies show that while chatbots may reduce operational costs, customers prefer speaking with human representatives when addressing complex or emotional issues. Even in AI-generated art, music, and writing, there is a lingering sense that something is missing: the human touch. As AI becomes more advanced, the question arises: can machines truly replace human creativity, or are they limited to imitation? AI governance and the illusion of autonomy. Corporations often present AI as a way to achieve efficiency and neutrality, but AI systems are only as unbiased as the data they are trained on. Many algorithms reflect existing social inequalities, reinforcing biases in hiring, policing, and lending. Predictive policing systems, for instance, disproportionately target marginalized communities, while AI-based hiring tools often discriminate against women and minorities. Despite claims of neutrality, AI systems reflect the priorities of their creators: corporations whose goal is profit, not fairness. This raises a critical question: if AI systems are controlled by corporations, who holds them accountable? Governments have so far struggled to regulate AI and automation, leaving corporations to set their own rules. This lack of oversight creates a dangerous precedent: a world where decisions that affect millions are made by algorithms with no transparency or accountability. The myth of robot dominance: why machines will not rule. The idea that robots will one day replace human beings entirely is a popular theme in science fiction, but the reality is more complex. Robots are designed to serve specific purposes. They can perform repetitive tasks, analyze data, and assist in logistics. But they cannot operate independently of the systems that created them. Corporations may rely on machines for production and analysis, but without humans to direct, interpret, and consume, the entire system collapses. Robots may excel in manufacturing, but they cannot innovate, lead, or empathize. A world ruled by machines is not only unlikely, it is impossible. Robots and AI will always need human beings to define their purpose and meaning. As AI expert Kai-Fu Lee noted, AI will transform our world, but it will not replace human beings. It will enhance what we do if we use it wisely. This perspective highlights the limit of corporate control. Without humans to drive demand and provide meaning, even the most advanced systems become obsolete. Technology without people: the collapse of corporate purpose. The ultimate limitation of automation is that it strips corporations of their purpose. Corporations exist to serve human needs to provide goods, services, and experiences. Without people to consume, engage, and innovate, corporate profit models become unsustainable. This is evident in automated customer service systems, which reduce costs but also alienate customers, leading to frustration and lost business. Similarly, fully automated factories can produce goods efficiently, but without buyers, these goods become meaningless. Automation offers short-term gains, but it cannot replace the long-term value that comes from human creativity, trust, and community. A symbiotic future: humans and machines working together. Rather than viewing automation as a threat, some argue that the future lies in a symbiotic relationship between humans and machines. AI and robotics can enhance human capabilities, freeing people from repetitive tasks and allowing them to focus on creativity, problem-solving, and connection. Companies like Tesla and Boston Dynamics are already exploring ways to integrate robots into human environments, not as replacements but as collaborative tools. Governments and corporations must recognize that *** technology works best when it serves humanity ***, not when it replaces it. Chapter 9: The Pursuit of Growth and the Threat to Humanity. The relentless pursuit of growth has become the defining feature of modern corporations. For businesses, growth is not just a goal, it is an obligation to shareholders. This obsession with expansion, driven by profits, has fueled innovation, created vast wealth, and connected the world like never before. But this unending race for more comes at a cost. Unchecked growth threatens the survival of the very systems it relies upon: societies, economies, and the environment. In this chapter, we examine what happens when corporations prioritize profit above all else and explore the profound consequences of a world driven solely by the pursuit of growth. Corporate growth as a mandate, not a choice. Publicly traded companies operate under a simple but rigid principle: grow or die. Quarterly earnings reports, stock valuations, and investor expectations create constant pressure to increase profits, expand markets, and cut costs. Corporations cannot simply maintain stability, they must continually seek new ways to grow. This imperative leads companies to push the boundaries of ethics, regulations, and sustainability. Amazon continues expanding its reach across industries, moving from e-commerce to healthcare to media, while Google's acquisition of smaller companies ensures that no potential competitor survives. Even tech giants that dominate their markets are never satisfied with enough, they need more. This endless growth imperative reveals the underlying tension between corporate power and long-term sustainability. In a finite world, infinite growth is impossible, something has to give. Environmental collapse, the cost of endless expansion. One of the clearest consequences of unchecked corporate growth is environmental destruction. Corporations consume natural resources at an unsustainable rate, producing waste and emissions that threaten ecosystems and contribute to climate change. The fossil fuel industry, despite acknowledging the realities of climate change, continues to explore new oil fields and lobby against environmental regulations, prioritizing short-term profits over the planet's future. Deforestation in the Amazon offers a stark example. Multinational companies clear vast areas of rainforest to grow soybeans and raise cattle, displacing indigenous communities and accelerating the loss of biodiversity. Governments that depend on corporate investment are reluctant to intervene, fearing economic downturns. The environmental crisis reveals a fundamental contradiction: corporate growth depends on natural resources, yet destroys them in the process. As David Attenborough warns, anyone who believes in infinite growth on a finite planet is either a madman or an economist. Economic inequality, concentration of wealth and power. The pursuit of growth has also led to the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few. As corporations grow larger, they consolidate industries, leaving workers with fewer choices and weaker bargaining power. In many cases, corporate profits soar, while wages remain stagnant. BlackRock and Vanguard, two of the largest asset managers in the world, control trillions of dollars in investments, giving them influence over thousands of companies. This consolidation of wealth has created a world where the richest 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 50% combined. Economic inequality poses a significant threat to democracy. When wealth is concentrated among a small elite, political power follows. As Thomas Piketty argues, the question is not whether wealth inequality will return, but whether democracy can survive it. The psychological cost of corporate expansion. The constant push for growth also takes a toll on society's mental and emotional well-being. Workers are pushed to their limits by corporate expectations of productivity, efficiency, and flexibility. The rise of gig work and precarious employment has left many people without job security, benefits, or a sense of stability. The pursuit of growth infiltrates everyday life. Social media platforms like Instagram and TikTok encourage users to constantly produce content, fueling engagement and advertising revenue. But this relentless pressure to perform has led to rising rates of burnout, anxiety, and depression. Corporations not only control economies, they shape how people live, interact, and define success. Consumer culture, driven by advertising, promotes the idea that happiness is tied to consumption, creating a vicious cycle of work, spend, and consume that leaves little room for personal fulfillment. When growth becomes self-destructive, unchecked corporate growth leads to a dangerous paradox: the very systems that fuel expansion eventually undermine it. As wealth becomes concentrated, consumer demand weakens. As natural resources are depleted, supply chains become unstable. As workers are replaced by automation, mass unemployment threatens economic collapse. Corporations may innovate their way out of some challenges, but there are limits to technological solutions. No amount of automation can replace the demand created by consumers or the stability provided by healthy ecosystems. Growth becomes self-destructive when it undermines the very foundations that sustain it. This dynamic played out during the 2008 financial crisis. Banks pursued profits through risky investments until the system collapsed under its own weight. Governments bailed out the financial sector, but the underlying issue, corporate greed, remained. As Naomi Klein observed, the market can collapse and be rebuilt, but it cannot change. The same systems that caused the crash will always recreate it. The limits of corporate control. In the end, corporations cannot exist without society. Even the most powerful companies depend on human labor, resources, and markets. Without consumers to buy their products and workers to run their systems, corporate empires crumble. This reality reveals the fundamental limit of corporate power: it is always dependent on human cooperation and participation. Governments, too, are complicit in the pursuit of growth, but they still hold the power to reshape priorities. The question is whether *** governments will act before it's too late and *** before environmental collapse, economic inequality, and social instability reach a tipping point. As Kurt Vonnegut once said, "We could have saved the world, but we were too damn cheap." This chapter has explored the self-destructive nature of corporate growth and the consequences of unchecked expansion. In the conclusion, we will reflect on the path forward, whether corporations and governments can realign their priorities to serve humanity and the planet, or whether we are destined to repeat the same cycles of crisis. Chapter 10: Corporate Profits and the Business of War. War is not just a geopolitical event, it is an economic engine, with industries thriving on the chaos it generates. While public narratives focus on ideological conflicts, power struggles, or national security, the reality is far more cynical. Wars create lucrative markets, offering opportunities for profits to surge in sectors ranging from weapons manufacturing to media coverage, and from mining to reconstruction. This chapter explores how various industries systematically benefit from conflict, prolong instability, manipulate governments, and shape policies, revealing a world where war is not just tragic, it is profitable. Private military contractors, mercenaries, and war for hire. Private military contractors, PMCs, operate in the shadows, providing security, logistics, and combat services. They fill the gaps where government militaries cannot or prefer not to engage officially, ensuring that conflicts can be outsourced. Companies like Blackwater, now Constellus, became notorious during the Iraq War for their involvement in controversial operations, including the Nissa Square massacre. Yet, despite public outrage, Blackwater continued to secure multi-million-dollar government contracts. DYN International has provided military training and police support in conflict zones, including Afghanistan and Iraq. Meanwhile, G4S, one of the largest security firms in the world, has secured contracts to protect oil facilities and infrastructure in unstable regions. These companies thrive on prolonged conflict. Every new military intervention or peacekeeping mission becomes a new contract opportunity, ensuring that instability and insecurity remain in their financial interest. Oil and gas industry, fueling war and profiting from instability. The oil and gas sector benefits directly from regional instability, as wars and political upheaval create supply disruptions that drive prices higher. ExxonMobil, Chevron, BP, and Shell have all operated in conflict zones, securing favorable contracts through relationships with unstable regimes. During the Iraq War, Halliburton profited immensely from no-bid contracts to rebuild the country's oil infrastructure. The former CEO of Halliburton, Dick Cheney, played a pivotal role in shaping U.S. policy toward Iraq, raising questions about the alignment between war and corporate interest. In Nigeria, Shell was implicated in funding paramilitary groups to suppress protests in the Niger Delta, ensuring continued control over oil fields. As long as wars disrupt global oil supplies, energy companies profit from higher prices and increased market power. Mining and extractive industries, profiting from conflict resources. Conflict zones are often rich in valuable resources like diamonds, cobalt, lithium, and rare earth metals. Mining companies exploit weak governance and instability to secure access to these resources at minimal cost. De Beers, historically linked to the blood diamond trade, profited from diamond sales that fueled wars in Sierra Leone and Angola. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, Glencore has faced allegations of child labor exploitation and collusion with armed groups to control cobalt mines. These minerals are essential for the production of electric car batteries, making modern technologies complicit in the profits of conflict. Wars create environments where regulations are lax, accountability is absent, and resources can be extracted without oversight, ensuring steady profits for mining corporations. Reconstruction firms, turning destruction into opportunity. Post-conflict reconstruction offers lucrative opportunities for companies specializing in infrastructure and logistics. Halliburton and Bechtel were awarded multi-billion-dollar contracts to rebuild Iraq after the U.S. invasion, despite allegations of corruption and mismanagement. KBR Incorporated, a former Halliburton subsidiary, handled logistics for the U.S. military, profiting from the prolonged nature of the conflict. In Afghanistan, Fluor Corporation secured contracts to build infrastructure that was often left incomplete, creating a cycle of dependency. The longer the reconstruction efforts take, the more these companies profit, turning post-war rebuilding into an open-ended business opportunity. Media and entertainment, war as spectacle. The media plays a crucial role in shaping public narratives around war, ensuring that conflicts remain in the public eye and continue to generate profits. News networks like CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC saw viewership spike during the Iraq War, turning crisis coverage into an advertising goldmine. Beyond the news cycle, entertainment companies like Warner Brothers and Sony Pictures produce war-themed movies and documentaries that captivate audiences. Films like American Sniper and Zero Dark 30 have grossed hundreds of millions of dollars, benefiting from military cooperation and equipment access in exchange for favorable portrayals of the armed forces. The media frames wars in ways that align with corporate interests, ensuring public support for interventions while profiting from sensational coverage. Cybersecurity and technology, the new battleground. Modern warfare is no longer confined to physical battlefields. Cybersecurity and surveillance companies now play a vital role in conflict. Palantir Technologies provides data analytics tools used in counterterrorism operations, while Booz Allen Hamilton specializes in cybersecurity services for the U.S. government. Google's controversial involvement in Project Maven, an AI initiative to improve drone targeting, highlighted the growing role of technology firms in modern warfare. Although Google eventually canceled the project after employee protests, the incident revealed the deepening relationship between big tech and the military. As conflicts increasingly involve cyber attacks and digital espionage, the demand for cybersecurity services ensures that technology firms remain key players in the business of war. War and the stock market, betting on conflict. Every time a war erupts, certain stocks surge, making conflict a lucrative opportunity for investors. Defense stocks like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon Technologies, and Northrop Grumman typically rise when military budgets increase. Oil companies also benefit from rising prices during conflicts in energy-producing regions, with stocks like ExxonMobil and Chevron gaining value. Hedge funds and institutional investors monitor geopolitical tensions closely, positioning their portfolios to profit from expected disruptions. Gold, often seen as a safe haven asset, rises in value during wars, with ETFs like SPDR Gold shares and mining stocks like Barrick Gold seeing gains. Some traders even use algorithms to scan news headlines for signs of conflict, automatically executing trades based on geopolitical developments. The winners in the stock market are often those who see the conflict coming. The moral paradox, profiting from war. The alignment of corporate profits with conflict creates a moral paradox. While wars cause immense suffering, they also generate wealth for shareholders and investors. This raises profound ethical questions about whether it is justifiable to profit from human misery. Socially responsible investors have begun divesting from weapons manufacturers and companies involved in conflict zones, but such efforts remain limited. Chris Hedges, in his book War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning, noted that war is a racket, echoing the sentiment that the machinery of conflict serves economic interests more than ideological or humanitarian goals. As long as profits are tied to war, peace will remain elusive. Conclusion: breaking the cycle of profit and war. This chapter has shown that war is not just an outcome of political decisions, it is a business model that sustains multiple industries. Private military contractors, oil companies, mining firms, reconstruction giants, media networks, and technology companies all thrive in a world of instability. Through lobbying, media manipulation, and covert operations, these industries ensure that the conditions for future conflicts are always present. Breaking the cycle requires more than government regulation, it demands a fundamental restructuring of corporate incentives and a reimagining of how peace can become profitable. Without such change, the invisible hand of profit will continue to guide the future of war, ensuring that for every bomb dropped, someone somewhere celebrates a rising portfolio. Chapter 11: The Digital Cage, Surveillance, Control, and the Future of Compliance. The tools of control are no longer chains or battalions, they are algorithms and data streams, hidden in the glow of smartphones and laptops. Surveillance capitalism has transformed the digital realm into the new battlefield, where corporate and state interests converge to shape public behavior without the need for physical force. This is the future, a cage without bars, where people move freely under the illusion of choice, unaware that every action is tracked, every decision nudged, and every thought subtly manipulated. Compliance is no longer demanded, it is engineered. The seamless integration of big data, AI, and personalized misinformation ensures that people participate in their own control. Surveillance capitalism, as coined by Shoshana Zuboff, began quietly in the explosion of social media and online platforms in the early 21st century. Google, Facebook, and Amazon offered services for free, collecting vast amounts of user data to feed their algorithms. Zuboff describes it as a new economic order that claims human experience as free raw material for hidden commercial practices of extraction, prediction, and sales. What started as targeted advertising quickly evolved into a powerful system of behavioral prediction and manipulation. Today, the same algorithms that recommend a new pair of shoes also shape political beliefs, public discourse, and elections. A key example of this manipulation came to light in 2018 with the Cambridge Analytica scandal, in which data from 87 million Facebook users was harvested to influence the 2016 US election and the Brexit referendum. Through micro-targeted misinformation campaigns, individuals were fed customized narratives tailored to their fears, desires, and biases. As whistleblower Christopher Wiley revealed, these techniques were used to create information dominance, swaying political outcomes by turning data into psychological weapons. The scandal demonstrated how personal data is weaponized to shape not only consumer habits but also democracy itself. Platforms like Facebook and Twitter are not just tools for connection, they are engines of division, where algorithms promote outrage to maximize engagement. As Tristan Harris, a former Google ethicist, explains, we've moved from having a tools-based technology environment to an addiction and manipulation-based technology environment. This division ensures that people remain distracted, turning against each other rather than questioning the system. Social media creates chaos not by accident, but by design. Beyond elections, corporate and state interests have merged in the realm of predictive policing. Palantir Technologies, a secretive data mining firm, provides predictive analytics to police departments across the United States. Using vast amounts of personal and historical data, Palantir's algorithms can forecast potential criminal activity. This system ensures compliance not just through punishment but by predicting dissent before it can grow. As Palantir's founder, Peter Thiel, once said, the way to deal with dissent is to stop it before it starts. In China, the social credit system represents the future of digital control, where citizens are constantly monitored and scored based on their behavior, online activities, and purchases. Those with low scores face restrictions on travel, employment, and even education. This system makes resistance nearly impossible, as people are forced to comply in every aspect of their lives or risk exclusion from society. According to Rogi Kremers, an expert on China's digital policy, the social credit system is the ultimate test in social engineering. It ensures total compliance through constant surveillance, where everyone is both the watched and the watcher. The integration of AI and surveillance tools ensures that control evolves silently. Every click, purchase, and interaction feeds the algorithms, tightening the web around individuals without them even realizing it. The Edward Snowden leaks in 2013 further exposed how governments work hand in hand with corporations to monitor citizens, proving that even democracies are no strangers to mass surveillance. As Snowden said, the architecture of oppression is always under construction. Surveillance takes a toll not only on freedom but also on the mind. When every move is monitored, and every thought could be manipulated, people experience anxiety, burnout, and learned helplessness. The constant need to perform compliance, whether at work, online, or in public, creates a mental burden that few can escape. Yuval Noah Harari warned in 21 Lessons for the 21st Century that big data knows you better than you know yourself, pointing to the growing divide between those who control the data and those who are controlled by it. People become prisoners of their own exhaustion. The endless cycle of work, consumption, and digital engagement leaves no room for reflection or resistance. In this system, desires are manufactured, insecurities exploited, and identities shaped to serve corporate interests. Freedom becomes an illusion, a fleeting feeling that vanishes the moment a notification pings or a new deadline looms. The psychological toll of always being watched is profound. Studies have shown that constant surveillance leads to heightened stress, anxiety, and self-censorship. Michel Foucault's concept of the panopticon, a prison design where inmates are always being watched but never know when, applies eerily to our digital age. People behave as though they are constantly being monitored, adjusting their actions to fit what they believe is expected of them. Surveillance capitalism, as Zuboff argues, turns people into subjects of a totalitarian regime we do not see or name. If every action can be predicted and every decision influenced, what does freedom mean? In this system, freedom is reduced to the ability to choose between pre-approved options, curated by algorithms. Real freedom, freedom of thought, freedom of dissent, requires the ability to act unpredictably, to imagine something beyond what the system allows. As Edward Snowden once said, arguing that you don't care about the right to privacy because you have nothing to hide is no different than saying you don't care about free speech because you have nothing to say. Privacy and freedom are not luxuries, but the bedrock of any real democracy. Without them, we are left with a system where choice is an illusion, a rigged game where all roads lead to compliance. The tools of control have evolved, but the purpose remains the same: to maintain power, maximize profits, and neutralize resistance. Compliance in the digital age is not enforced with guns or prisons, but with algorithms and data points. The most revolutionary act, then, is to refuse to play the game, to step outside the cycle of digital consumption, to reject the narratives that divide us, and to reclaim our attention and imagination. In the end, the battle for freedom is not just external, it is internal. It begins with the refusal to comply mentally, even when compliance seems inevitable. The cracks in the system will come, and when they do, those who have seen through the illusion will be ready. Conclusion: the illusion of normalcy and the power of unawareness. The greatest triumph of corporate power is not just the wars it wages or the profits it earns, it is the illusion of normalcy it maintains. Most people are not even aware of the deeper structures of control because the system ensures that they are too busy surviving, working, and consuming to notice. Full-time jobs, long commutes, bills, debt, and carefully managed media narratives leave little room for reflection, awareness, or resistance. This is not an accident, it is a deliberate feature of the system. By occupying every waking moment with work and consumption, the system makes it seem as though this way of life is normal and inescapable. People are told that war, inequality, environmental collapse, and financial crises are just the way things are. And with little time to think beyond survival, most people internalize this message without ever questioning it. Work as control, exhausting the will to resist. The system's most powerful tool is not military force, it is the structure of everyday life. By keeping people overworked and indebted, it ensures that even the smallest act of defiance feels out of reach. People work to survive, not to thrive. Bills must be paid, debt serviced, and families fed, leaving little time or energy for political engagement or activism. Media distractions and consumer culture fill every spare moment, numbing the mind and redirecting energy into consumption instead of reflection or action. The constant anxiety of job insecurity keeps people from speaking out, as they fear losing the means to survive. The system doesn't need to repress people actively, it only needs to keep them too busy and exhausted to think critically or act. Manufactured ignorance, the role of media and propaganda. The media plays a crucial role in keeping people uninformed or misinformed. News cycles focus on sensational stories and surface-level controversies, diverting attention from systemic issues. Corporate-controlled media frames wars, economic crises, and inequality as isolated events, making it difficult for people to see the patterns of control. Propaganda creates villains and heroes that align with corporate interests, ensuring that wars are framed as necessary and corporate greed goes unquestioned. Social media, while offering some space for alternative narratives, drowns people in information overload and divisive discourse, making it harder to find meaningful truths. Education systems focus on individual achievement rather than collective awareness, ensuring that most people never learn to question the broader system. As a result, most people do not even know they are being controlled. They experience war and inequality as distant realities, disconnected from their own lives, while focusing on personal survival within the narrow framework the system allows. The trap of ignorance and survival, a closed loop. This creates a seemingly unbreakable cycle. People are kept too busy surviving to think critically, and those who might awaken to the truth are drowned in distractions. Meanwhile, resistance movements that do arise are co-opted or suppressed, and political candidates promising change are puppets of the same corporate interests. It is easy to believe that this system will continue forever, feeding on labor, war, and ignorance, while people remain too exhausted or distracted to resist. The harshest truth is this: most people will never resist, not because they don't care, but because they are not even aware of what they are resisting. What can be done when awareness is limited? If most people are trapped in survival mode, unaware of the larger systems at play, is change still possible? The answer is not simple. Mass awareness and organized resistance may not be possible under these conditions. But small acts of clarity and defiance still matter. Creating pockets of awareness, even among a few, can keep the possibility of change alive. Independent education, books, conversations, and art can slowly awaken those who are ready to see beyond the surface. Building small, local alternatives such as cooperative businesses, independent media, or community networks can offer glimpses of another way to live. These actions will not overthrow the system, but they preserve the potential for change in the future. When the system falters, whether from economic collapse, environmental disaster, or internal corruption, those who have cultivated awareness will be ready to act. A glimmer of possibility, preparing for uncertain moments. While large-scale change feels impossible today, history teaches us that unexpected events create cracks in even the most powerful systems. Economic crises, environmental disasters, and political scandals will create moments of instability. In those moments, prepared minds, those who have resisted in small ways, can shape what comes next. Change may not come in our lifetime, and it may not look like a grand revolution. It will likely come quietly, in moments of disorder. But those who have seen through the illusion of normalcy will be the ones to rebuild in the aftermath. A final reflection: resisting by seeing. The task before us is not just to fight the system, but to see it for what it is, to reject the illusion that this way of life is inevitable. Most people will remain unaware, and most will continue to survive within the narrow confines of the system. But for those who awaken, the task is clear: to resist, to endure, and to be ready. We may not win today or tomorrow, but awareness is the first step. As long as some people see through the illusion, the possibility for a better future survives. The system thrives on ignorance and exhaustion, but even the smallest acts of clarity disrupt its power. In a world designed to keep people blind and busy, seeing clearly is a revolutionary act. When the cracks appear, and they will, someday, those who have seen will be ready to build something new. Epilogue. Living with clarity, endurance in a system without end. Awareness is not easy. Seeing through the illusion of normalcy is not a gift, it is a burden. For those who realize that the world is governed by corporate power, markets, and endless wars, the knowledge does not bring freedom. It brings loneliness, frustration, and the quiet weight of helplessness. What do you do when you see the world for what it is, but know you cannot change it? How do you live with the knowledge that the wars will continue, the corporations will thrive, and the politicians will lie regardless of what you say or do? Most people will never see what you see. They will live and die within the system, believing they are free, thinking their work matters, convinced that elections can change things. They are not at fault, they are simply too busy surviving to ask questions, too exhausted to resist. It is like waking from a dream only to discover that everyone around you is still asleep. Knowing the truth is isolating, it leaves you watching a world that carries on as if nothing is wrong, even though everything is shaped by control. For those who awaken, the journey is a difficult one. Resistance feels futile. Every movement is hijacked, every leader crushed, every act of defiance absorbed by the system and turned into profit. Awareness can feel like a curse, isolating you from a world that seems to accept things as they are. Even though resistance seems impossible, and collapse unlikely, there is power in seeing clearly. Clarity itself is a form of defiance. In a world built on lies, knowing the truth is a quiet rebellion. As in the Matrix, the hardest part of waking up is not seeing the illusion, it is living with it every day, knowing that most people will never escape it. The system doesn't need to chain you physically. It only needs you to believe that resistance is impossible. There is no guarantee of change, no promise of collapse, no certainty of revolution. The system may continue for years, decades, or even lifetimes, consuming everything in its path, keeping people too busy to question, too tired to resist. But history shows that no system of control lasts forever. Even the most powerful empires and corporations eventually falter and collapse under the weight of their own contradictions. What comes after, no one can say. The system will not be defeated in a single act, it will wear itself out, crumble slowly, and when that happens, those who have kept the truth alive will be the ones to shape what follows. Endurance means living without illusions, seeing the truth even when it's painful, and being ready for the moments of instability when they arrive. It means staying clear-headed in a world designed to confuse. Grand resistance may seem impossible today, but small acts of defiance still matter. The system thrives on compliance, on people believing they have no choice but to play along. Every time you choose not to comply, even in the smallest way, by questioning the narrative, by refusing to participate fully in the cycle of consumption, or by sharing the truth with those willing to hear it, you disrupt the machinery, even if just a little. These small acts will not topple the system, but they keep something alive. They keep the possibility of change open. And that possibility is enough. Change may not come soon, and it may not look the way we expect. The system is too entrenched, too efficient to collapse easily. But unexpected cracks will appear through economic crises, environmental disasters, or political upheavals. When those cracks open, those who have kept their clarity will be ready to act. This is not about revolution or heroism. It is about being prepared mentally, emotionally, and practically for the moments when the system falters. The machinery cannot grind on forever. When it stumbles, there will be an opportunity not to recreate the old world, but to build something new. We may not see the change we hope for in our lifetime. But endurance is not just for today, it is for those who come after us. Even if we cannot break the system ourselves, we can plant seeds of resistance and clarity that will grow in future generations. The systems of control that exist now will not last forever, and when they collapse, those who have endured will be the ones to shape what follows. Living with clarity is its own kind of victory. It means you have not surrendered, even if the world expects you to. It means you have chosen to see, even when others look away. And it means you are ready quietly, patiently for the moment when things change. The system is powerful, but it is not invincible. It relies on people believing in its inevitability, on their exhaustion and compliance. The most revolutionary act, then, is to refuse to believe. To live with the knowledge that things are not as they seem and never have to be. In a world where compliance is expected and exhaustion is the norm, simply seeing clearly is an act of defiance. Endure, stay aware, and be ready. The cracks will come. And when they do, those who have lived with clarity will be the ones to rebuild.